When you get to a certain point in your career and in your leadership, it's pretty easy to hit a learning plateau. This video is intended to give you some more advanced facilitation and leadership ideas that will potentially push you off of that learning plateau and into the realm of being a smarter, better leader. The source of the content in this video actually stems from 3 questions that some of the smartest facilitators and leaders asked to me. Number 1, what do you do with failure? Number 2, have you found a way to get more engagement and more questions from your audience, your group, your team? And the third question, or the comment was, hey Chad, watching your videos and seeing you present, it appears you like to use props a lot. I do. And so the question is, how often do we use them and what's the benefit? What do I do with failure? Cry in a corner and run away and hide my face. No, I've learned, my late co-founder and partner in crime, Will Wise, always used to say that it was actually impossible to fail if you were learning something from that experience. The only way you could fail is if you didn't learn anything. An idea that I got from author Dan Pink is to create a failure resume. So I actually have on Google Docs a piece of paper, a digital piece of paper, that looks exactly like a resume, structured exactly like a resume. It's even pretty aesthetically pleasing. It's well designed, except it is my failure resume. And every time I make some blunder or misstep, I go in there and I add the title of that failure, and the bullet points underneath are the learnings that I had. And so in this keynote that I gave recently, I totally misused the word expulsion in a way that just didn't make any sense at all. Very teeny little failure, right? But in that moment, I actually just paused and had this little raw moment with the audience of expulsion? Is that actually a word? And we just had this little dialogue back and forth. And so I added that to my failure resume under the title, You're Expelled, and just a couple bullets about the value of leaning right into a misstep and actually involving somebody else in fixing and mending that misstep. As opposed to, I think what's really easy to do as a leader is to aspire to be perfect and fix it and adjust it and get it right. I think deep in our brain, in our amygdala, we have this fight, flight, or need to be right. And if we can let go of that need to be right and really lean into our failures, I think that it makes us more relatable. The second piece of advice around failure also came from Will, and he shared it with me as I was planning my first ever TEDx talk in 2013 or something. And he said, as I was mapping out, choosing what stories to share and how to share them, etc., he said, there is immense power in sharing your own failures and other people's successes. That's hard to do. Right? That's really hard to do with a group, to share your own failures, but other people's successes. And I did that. I took his advice. I shared this total personal failure story in that TED Talk. And by far, when I talk to people afterward, and still, if people watch it today, they mention, oh, the girl in the green jacket. Right? They remember that story. It really stuck out to them. And so there's immense power as you're dealing with your own failure of saying, rather than going, oh my goodness, I failed, I need to be right, I need to fix it, I need to mend it, etc. What if you said, oh, awesome, this is a future moment that I can share with my people, my group, my family, etc. I need to stop saying etc. I'm adding that to my failure resume. I say etc. too much. 2, have you found ways to get more questions or engagement from your audience or your group or your team? Sure, yeah, that's a big part of my job. One of the biggest pieces is, and the moment I want to bring you to is, imagine that you were, probably if you're watching this, you're out of school, but imagine that you were in college and you just listened to a 45, 50-minute lecture from a professor. And at the very end, they asked, any questions? And then maximum, they left 2 to 3 seconds for a response. You probably heard the sound of somebody's backpack zipping up and everybody shuffling out of the room. And the reason they didn't get any engagement or any questions or any feedback there, right? So think about this in a brainstorming context too. You're at a meeting. Hey everybody, we really need to solve this. We need to cut down time on this. We need to increase sales on this, right? Any ideas? And we leave 2 to 3 seconds of total silence and nothing happens. The reason you didn't get any engagement as a leader is because 2 seconds is not enough time for the brain to take in all this data, like a 50-minute lecture or this big meeting or this problem that you've just thrown to a group, to take all that data in, convert it into a sentence that ends in a question mark or some brilliant idea, then develop the courage to publicly speak and share it with the group, and then actually raise your hand and toss it out, or to actually open your mouth and speak it. It's just not enough time. And so if you want more engagement from the group, I would strongly invite you to use productive silence. And so if I'm gonna ask for any engagement from somebody, I'm also going to preface it with, hey, in a minute, I'm gonna ask for questions. And first, I wanna just give a quick recap of what we just talked about. Ba-doop, 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 ba-doop. Then I'm gonna leave 5 to 10 seconds of solid silence for you to just sit back and think and ponder what you want to ask. I want everybody to come up with a question, no matter whether you're gonna ask it or not. I want you to actually your brain to go through the process of coming up with a question, and then we're just gonna popcorn out a handful of questions. That process alone, really simple to implement, we'll get way more ideas, it'll generate way more questions, way more discussion, way more dialogue. It will avoid groupthink and allow introverts' voices to be heard along with extroverts' voices, as opposed to just getting the quickest thinker or the fastest talker or the loudest talker. Or oftentimes who I'll hear from in a group if I don't do this process is the person who's most uncomfortable with silence. And so they don't actually have anything meaningful to say. They're just like, we've been sitting here for 3 seconds, I've got to say something. Right? It's just like, it's totally not productive to the group and moving things forward. Last tip there, if I'm inviting people to come up with ideas or questions, as much as possible, I try to get them to come up with questions about a specific thing. So right now, as you're watching this video, if I were to say, hey, come up with a question and drop it in the comments, kind of hard. As opposed to if I said, hey, the failure resume idea, that was kind of cool. Can you come up with a question related to that and drop that in the comments? Right? When I ask you to funnel your curiosity or funnel your idea generation to a very specific idea or topic. So another example from a brainstorming perspective, if I ask you to, hey, we need to cut down the amount of time that we're meeting every week. It's painful, it's too much, we need to cut it down. What ideas do you have? Right? Really, really open-ended, as opposed to if I said, we really need to cut down our meeting time. Can you come up with an idea that somehow involves this globe to cut down our meeting time? Now, it might still take people a minute to think about that because it's a bit of a weird prompt, but because you're involving the globe, because you put something in their brain, you've given them an anchor to actually hang on to and latch on to. When you give people a specific enough prompt, it creates an anchor. If you don't, they're just gonna be in a boat without an anchor, floating along aimlessly. Speaking of globes, you appear to like to use props a lot, Chad. What's the point? How often do you use them? As leaders, as presenters, should we be using them? And what I would say to that is the brain is wired to take in visual and experiential data and wire it into long-term memory. That's a grave oversimplification and probably an overstatement of how our brains really work and process information. But in general, visual data is really good. Language and numbers, not so memorable, right? We'll remember some bits, but it's hard to predict which bits, etc. And so for me, talking about anchors, I like to use props as a really specific anchor. So if I want to make a point, I'm gonna take out the exclamation point and hold that up. So typically, if I'm planning a workshop or a keynote or a video or something else, I might pick somewhere between 1 to 3 props max to use to reset people's attention, sparks people's curiosity, and also anchor an idea. The cool thing is stories, I believe, can actually be used as props. I mentioned earlier my failure story about the girl in the green jacket. People remember that green jacket because I painted a picture, I painted a visualization in their head with that story. And if you want to hear that story, here is the first TEDx talk I was ever invited to give almost 10 years ago on positive social risks.